you cannot readjust your rents to market once your tenant leaves. So there are workarounds for that, but technically you're supposed to use that 2.9% increase in between tenants. And then there's like a certain coefficient that you can add because you did work, but like it's not going to be an adjustment to market.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Chronicles. I'm your host, Jonny Cattani, and the founder of Cattani Capital Group. For the last 2 years, I've been studying alternative assets and now help solve the problem of creating passive cash flow for creators, influencers, and busy professionals by bringing you 5 episodes a week of easy to understand education in the world of passive investing. What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Cash Flow Chronicles. I'm your host, Jonny Cattani, and I'm joined today by Terrie Schauer. With 20 plus years of experience as a real estate investor and property manager, Terrie is CEO and founder of MRG Management, property management and real estate consulting group based in Montreal, Canada. She's a leading authority on applying mindfulness principles to real estate investing and has written the #1 best-selling book on the topic, Mindful Landlord. She hosts the Real Estate Investors Club podcast, a show geared to help fellow and aspiring investors build their portfolio for profit and peace of mind. She holds a Ph.D. in communications and master's degree from Oxford University. 3-time world champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Her best-selling book, Mindful Landlord, currently available on Amazon. Terrie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me on.
We're grateful to have you. Nice little podcast swap. I was on your pod. We also met in person at a podcasting conference. So
yeah, we did.
Down in gorgeous Florida. You have an incredible resume, but you're actually a very down-to-earth person. So I want everyone to know that this is going to be a very, very valuable podcast, and we're excited. So let's get started. Like I said, you've got an incredible resume. You could be doing anything, but here you are in real estate. That's what I want to start with. Okay, so you've got your PhD in communications, master in Oxford, you're a master in jiu-jitsu. Why aren't you fighting all around the world? Why are you in real estate? Let's start with the genesis story there. When did you discover real estate and what's led you to here?
Yeah, so I kind of fell into it by accident. I was 19. I moved away from my hometown to go study in Toronto. And there was no space in student residence. So I ended up in this like crazy, like communal house where there was a room for rent, and it was a complete disaster. So basically, like one day to the next, moved out of my parents' house, moved into the student house, and was then managing it because they voted me house manager. And so that's kind of how things started. And that went so well that once I was finished studying, I came back to Montreal and said to my dad, I've been managing the student housing for 5 years or whatever. Lend me a down payment. Let's buy a building and I'll do it for profit. And then that happened, and one thing led to another. So like partly, I think getting into real estate was an accident. When I made the choice after finishing my PhD to go full-time in real estate, that was a conscious decision. And you asked me, why are you not traveling the world, competing and fighting? Well, the answer is that I did, and I did that for 15 years.
Oh, wow.
Because I was able to be financially independent through real estate investing and have the freedom to be in the gym 3 hours a day. And once I kind of realized, like, I was studying for a long time. So I studied till I was about like 30. And then once I realized, like, okay, do I want to get like a real job, or do I want to be in business for myself and manage my own thing? And I was like, wow, no, I don't want to work 9 to 5 for someone else, because the financial freedom and the just controlling my time is so valuable. So it's not, one thing or the other. It's that allowed me to have this lifestyle where I'm able to do something interesting and fulfilling and financially lucrative with my time, but it doesn't eat up everything. So
I love that. Yeah, that's kind of the answer I wanted you to give, because that's a big push that I'm pushing with, especially young millennials, is, this sort of like freedom is a lot closer and a lot easier and attainable than you think. And easy is subjective, of course. So your specialty is obviously in Montreal. It's kind of a niche market. So let's kind of touch on that. What is the market like? What's Canadian real estate like kind of compared to the US?
So You know, a little bit of history. Like we basically didn't have 2008, and you know, we had a little funny conversation off camera before you hit record, where you're like, you know, is the sky falling up there, Chicken Little? And I'm like, well, no, because like our banks are so regulated that those kind of, you know, shocks that maybe are more familiar to people in the US, like we really don't have them. Now, what that means is that we are just have less access to credit and things go less quickly. Also, our tenancy markets are like much more regulated. Like think if this is like New York and California, we're like this much to the left.
Wow.
Yeah.
You can get more left of it.
No, you've no idea. So like, you know, think like heavy rent control, think like you can never evict someone. And like, I don't know if the conversation is going to go there, but like I have some real horror stories of like the tenants can do whatever they want and you basically can't evict them. So we have this like quite socialist environment, which means that, you know, you kind of can't raise your rents that much and the credit is super regulated. So it means that our markets are just much more slow moving. But like I always say, like I'm even in a part of Canada that's a niche because I'm in the French part of Canada. And so there's this kind of protective screen around our market that really keeps a lot of people out because our laws are different, because you basically have to do business in French here. And so it means that like we don't really have that much capital from outside coming in. So for those of us who are working here, it's actually kind of great because there's not that much competition. There's not that much competition in terms of like how people operate. So like if you were to come here, you'd probably like be, wow, you guys are 15 years behind, but it's because like there's just no pressure on us to evolve any faster. And it also means that we're not competing against like a lot of, you know, outside money, private capital, foreign, whatever it is, because everyone's like, oh, Quebec, super regulated, French, I don't want to deal with that. Leave it for you guys, you know?
Yeah. And you couldn't come in and be like some American investor who just like turns and burns because the regulations would just absolutely halt you.
Yeah. I mean, it's starting now. It's actually interesting. So like our industrial space is like off the hook right now. Like it's really going crazy. And I think
Same.
that's because, but that's also because there's not barriers there, right? Like
Oh,
those are
interesting.
bigger projects. We don't have those like super strict tenancy laws are only on residential real estate. So, you know, on the segments of our market that are not like, let's say protected from outside money, I think, you know, there is some outside penetration, but like, as far as our residential markets go, like you basically need Quebec partners, in order to be successful here, which works, right? Like I have maybe 50% of my partners are from out of province. So it works, but you need people on the ground here.
But still Canadian. Have any US investors ever entertained the possibility of getting involved there?
Entertained, yes. I don't have any American partners. I haven't so far. I have European partners. I have a partner with money from the Gulf. So we do have foreign money coming in, but I think that the US, like you can just move so quickly that the returns are, you know, more attractive. And I think that maybe American investors have less of a tendency to look outside of their own borders, like maybe Latin America. But I don't know that we have all that much American investment up here.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. You know, again, we don't have nearly the regulations, but you know, look what it causes. Like we were talking about offline, right? Is every 10 to 12 years, you have to go through this just, you know, the Fed always tries to indicate that they're going to try to create some soft landing, but it never is, right? I mean, '08 was an absolute collapse. I mean, we literally have had 3 bank failures. Even the Swiss are in trouble, which when the Swiss are in trouble, then you're like, okay, well, you guys are supposed to be leading the charge in banking. What does that mean for the rest of us? You know, but luckily, well, I shouldn't say luckily, but Credit Suisse has kind of always been in trouble. So I think that one didn't necessarily surprise very many people, but certainly the regional banks were a bit of a shock. It appears we've gotten that under control. So what does investing there look like? You mentioned all of the regulations. Let's say, you know, we're willing to put up with all of that. What does it kind of look like, you know, from start to finish, kind of high level?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So like in Canada, we basically have like 5 major banks. There are smaller lenders, but like if you were to look at, let's say the credit markets, like I think the 5 major banks must take up 80% of it. And then as far as how you can borrow, conventional lending will lend up to 80% of a deal. And that's in multifamily, 80% of the economic value of a deal. So like right now, let's say a building is selling for $1 million, but the economic value is only, 500-600K. The bank will lend you 80% of 500 or 600K.
What's the difference?
So like the economic value, like imagine you were buying a business, okay? Like there's a way of establishing the economic value of that business. So like, 3 times EBITDA or like whatever it is, right? And so like there's a similar equation to establish like building value. And so if you put in the debt coverage ratio, all the expenses, we have like sort of a cruncher, and then the cruncher spits out what would be the economic value of that building.
Oh, so it's like the NOI basically.
Not exactly, because that then just tells you what's your cash flow at the end of it, right? With like NOI, this is what you're going to be left with. But like it's the NOI minus like the debt service, and then that spits out like a value that would be comparable to if you were purchasing a building. And so basically like those values of sale price and like economic value are uncoupled today in like a very intense way. And so it means that like you have to put so much capital into a deal that there's like absolutely no way the bank can fail. And like what's happened, the bank won't fail, but like what will happen is the individual investor might have problems, because how do you raise that 500K? Well, then maybe you're going to see a private lender, or maybe you've borrowed some money somewhere else. And like, that's where the risk is, but it's not so much like our mortgage lending, because the bank only will lend such a small amount, especially like in multifamily. Like it's not even 80% of the sale price, it's 80% of the economic value. So you've got so much money in the deal, like you're going to really lose money way before the bank does.
Fascinating. So then is there cash flow for investors, or is it pretty much all on the appreciation side?
I mean, it depends again, like how much capital you're putting in, right? Because like, let's say you have like whatever 800K deal and you've put 300K in there. Like it's kind of hard to not have the building cash flow just because you put so much capital in, but then your return is not that great. And then the return ends up being on, appreciation, or like what we would call optimization. And then in our heavily rent controlled markets, that then becomes, how do you turn some of the tenants over? How do you manage to create value by raising the rents or cutting expenses? And so that's kind of what the game is like here. You're going to end up having to deploy a fairly large amount of capital. And if you have a strategy in a 2 to 5 year period, or even less than that, right? Like some other operators can go faster, have a way to add value to the building by raising revenue and decreasing expenses. Well, that's kind of how you end up making money. And then you can refinance, pull some of the capital out, or sell if that's your game plan.
Okay, so it's similar in that sense. Then that's a pretty proven strategy here. I mean, similar strategy. I mean, that's what most are trying to do. Value add, right? Like maybe the units need to be renovated and new appliances or better flooring or whatever it is, right? That's the ideal, kind of the dream deal that everybody goes for, which is harder to find here now, but. So you mentioned these rent controls are even farther left than we can imagine. I know you have horror stories. Let's kind of touch on, they're obviously very tenant friendly. What is that? So is there any way to evict? Like if someone's not paying, can you eventually get them out, or what does that kind of look like?
Yeah. So basically the only reason for which you can get someone out is non-payment. And so like we pray that our bad tenants will not pay. But everything else, so leases here renew automatically. I cannot terminate a lease.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So year on year, my leases renew themselves automatically, and I'm allowed to increase by whatever the government gives us, like a specific coefficient. This year it was 2.9%. So like and all our leases renew on the same day. It's July 1st in Quebec. So like, I'm just, yeah, it's really weird. So like, I just got through this phase of like, I send my renewal notices, and my renewal notices are like, okay, I increased your rent by 2.9%. And in some cases, the building had a lot of expenses, so I can push it to like 5%. And then the tenants have like a little checkbox where they can check refuse the increase, but remain in the apartment. And so like you can't repossess an apartment. You can't terminate a lease. Yeah. Right.
I don't even know how to respond to that, because that makes.
And then
like,
I can show
I'm good.
you.
I'm not going to pay extra, but thank you for offering.
Yeah. And I can show you, look, these are like my court files now, because I had tenants who didn't want the 5% increase. So they checked the refusal box. And so now this week I opened 10 rental board files where we're going to go to the like rent fixation court, where like I have to bring all my bills, and then the judge is going to like plug all the expenses in and tell me like how much am I allowed to increase this person. So
fascinating. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Okay. So this is what deters US investors. They're like, yeah, no, I'm good. I'll just go to California to invest. At least there you can eventually. So one thing that is not uncommon in California, because one thing that has changed in certain markets is after a certain year, like if your building was built like after, I think it's recently 2005 or 10 or something, you no longer have rent controls in certain markets. So what people are doing is paying tenants to leave. Is that an option? Can you pay someone to leave so you can increase and like make the unit nice again, or what does that look like?
So, yeah, I mean, you can. Does it work? Like you have to imagine, like some of our rent control leases here are like market value might be $1,500 and the people are paying $600. So what offer could I make you that would get you out of that unit? Like usually it's older people, they've been in there for 30 years. Like they can't afford it. Like even if I come with a $10,000 check, like they can't afford it. Right.
They can't afford to go anywhere else.
No, and you can't find units like that anymore. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that if you go by the law here, you cannot readjust your rents to market once your tenant leaves. So there are workarounds for that, but technically you're supposed to use that 2.9% increase in between tenants. And then there's like a certain coefficient that you can add because you did work, but like it's not going to be an adjustment to market.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. So if you want to live, that's the place to go live, because everything's on your side. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And so obviously then it would make sense. The prices match all of this, right? Like, is there a negotiating room? Do you ever run into where it's like, no, this is overpriced. There's no way, that I can pay this much for it? Or what does that kind of look like in terms of, what they're listed for and negotiating?
Yeah. Well, I mean, then it comes down to your business model, right? And so like my business model as a property manager, like that was how I built my business. Like I look for low income areas where buildings are poorly managed. And so like we have a lot of this older generation of like mom and pop landlords who like basically hasn't increased the rent for 20 years, place is full of roaches, half the people are not paying. And so like for me to come in and clean that up and like raise the rents for half the units, like that's possible. And usually those kind of places will be priced cheap anyway, because no one wants to deal with those problems. So, for my business model, I'm buying low, but for a reason. And then that's kind of my value add, is to just, make the building more profitable through good management. I have colleagues who will do like a full gut. And so they come in, and then that's one way that you can get the tenants out, is if you have like major building transformation. And so they'll come in and let's say they have all 1 bedrooms and they have a way to change them to 2 bedrooms. Then that is, a way that you can evict people, or you can offer them money to leave. And then often if they realize there's going to be work for a year, like that might be reasons that tenants would go out. Are you able to price that in? I mean, I think like I painted this picture of Canada as this like extremely stable market. I mean, we also did not have a correction since the early 2000s. Like we didn't have 2008. So our market has been like, going up like this for the past 23 years. We are in a bit of a correction now. And so part of what's happening is that people are selling buildings as if it was 2021. But it's 2023. And so now with the new interest rates, like we also did have interest rate increases. So like, it's just very difficult right now to find deals that make sense because they are kind of all overpriced and the sellers haven't begun to come down yet. But I think it's inevitable that at some point, as like we were talking off camera, like refinancing comes up, they're going to have to now take a, whatever 3-4 point increase on their mortgage rates. Like we're going to see things coming onto the market and people are going to have to start doing deals. So at some point prices are going to come down, but it's not going to be like a crash situation.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're facing is, and it's for good reason. I mean, for us, interest rates were raised the fastest they've ever been raised in history. Just honestly, 14 months ago, interest rates were still, 3.5%, 4%. And, so sellers are like still trying to catch their breath and be like, wait a second, I can't get, X amount anymore. But again, kind of the same scenario where it's going to be forced. And then the whole market will adjust. But it's similar as well. You mentioned earlier what we call like a heavy lift, right? Where you come in sometimes tearing stuff down to the studs. So what does that look like? You can get someone out. Now, once you do that, can you then bring everything up to market?
Well, I mean, the thing is that there are workarounds. Like technically you can't, but most people who are professionally involved in the market here have ways of doing that. And like there's a contestation period. Does the new tenant have the old lease? Are they in contact with the people who moved out? Because they would have to be able to prove in court that the old lease was cheaper. There's kind of, unless they have a direct contact with the old tenants who are willing to give them the lease, they won't have it. Then you can also do lease transfers. Like there's kind of all these workarounds, but there's a chance if you're less knowledgeable that you get caught out. So in practice, like once people leave you, you do end up being able to readjust the rents. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. That's fascinating. So as we kind of move forward, you mentioned possible correction. What do you think, pull out your muddy crystal ball. What does the next kind of 12, 24 months look like in your market?
Well, like, I mean, again, if I was asking you to pronounce yourself on the entire United States, like it's difficult, right? Like, let's say Toronto and Vancouver, which are our very overvalued markets. I've heard, I think Toronto's gone down like 22% in Vancouver, something similar. Montreal, we didn't go up so much. And so I don't think we're going to come down that much. I've heard something like, an 8% correction. Now most of the statistics are for single family homes. So sometimes it's a bit difficult to like, pull the multifamily out of there. But I would say we'll have at least as much correction because the interest rates affect what deals make sense for investors. And like our single family home inventory is still super low. And so like that has maybe not come down because there's all this pent up demand and people are not listing because they can't trade up anymore. So a lot of people are just like staying put in whatever home they're in. And that's kind of gumming up the market. Whereas like with investment properties, like, it's refinance time. There's not as much money in there as you thought. Now you're going to sell. So.
Yeah. Okay. So that's very similar in that sense. So it's not totally like different. There's a lot of similarities. It's really the regulations that really hinder the.
Yeah. I mean, the tenancy law on one hand, and then the banking environment, which means you just need more capital to do stuff, but your environment is just less volatile, right? Like this is the biggest correction we've had in 23 years, but like the sky is not falling. So
I'm jealous. I'm jealous. We're going on our second massive correction in as much time, in less time. Gosh, 08. Unreal. But, I feel like here with internal optimism, you're like, well, maybe this will be when the regulations finally step in and this can't happen again. But
that's not what my crystal ball says.
No, too much greed in this country for sure. So when it comes to, do you still have the same sort of classifications where you kind of have your like class C, class B, class A, new development, all of that as well?
Yeah.
And what do you typically delve in? Are you all of it? Sounds like you typically like the Class C kind of value add.
Yeah. Yeah. That's my sweet spot, is like at the lower end of the lower end market here. And, you also have to like, Canada's everything is compressed, right? So our like, social bandwidth is like super compressed. So like we don't have guns. Our really sketchy areas, like I don't think would compare at all to your sketchy areas. Like we have the same kind of issues. Like there is a bit of crime, there's, drug addictions, there's pest control stuff, but there's no like, the new properties that I'm acquiring are like probably in the worst part of Montreal, but like I walk in there, nobody has guns. Like you talk to your tenants, nobody's threatening you. Like and because of that, like sort of, income compression spectrum, it means that like our Class C probably might look like your lower level B a little bit. So it's just like, and our A would not be your A either, right? Like Canadians tend to, our whole income spectrum is just like super compressed. We have like so much tax. We have actually think Quebec has like the lowest poverty rate in all North America, because we have crazy tax, but the redistribution means that, and we have such strong rent control. So like, yeah, our social bandwidth is much smaller. Universal healthcare, free education. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So your costs are a lot lower than just living. Just living costs are just, like you said, compressed.
Yeah. And
Okay.
and the state offers so much help. Like rent control is one form of help. Like imagine if your unit's worth 1,500, you're paying 600. Like, okay, your family only earns 30K, but like your rent is $600 and school is free and healthcare is free. So like, what are you really spending that money on? Like, okay, your kids need clothes and you need food, but like we have a good metro system. It's not dangerous. You can use public transit. Like we just don't have that much poverty here. So.
Interesting. So a lot of pros and cons, whereas here we're absolutely plagued by poverty and these regulations do nothing for it. So, I mean, gosh, you could do a whole podcast just on that, but okay. Interesting. And you're an operator as well, right? Like, do you own not just on the property management side?
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, like before I cracked the financing nut, because I'm like really self-taught. So we have this like line between residential and commercial financing. For like the first 10 years of my career, I had 9 units and I wasn't able to move beyond that because I didn't understand what the next level looked like. So I built this property management business because I hadn't figured out how to acquire more real estate. And then once I figured that out, then I'm like, okay, I'm not making that much money as a property manager. Like I have these skills, but like when I look at how much money I make my clients, like I need to be doing this for myself and partners. Like I need equity because I'm charging you $300 a month and I'm making you 300K a year. So no. And so as time has gone on, my management portfolio has like shrunk and my investment portfolio has grown.
That's very common here as well. A lot of your top property, like third-party property management companies, have their own portfolios. And that's one thing you look at is like, do they have their own portfolio? For that exact reason, I don't know what it is about property management. It just seems like no one really wants to do it. It's just people do it because they're good at it. I don't know. Did you enjoy it? Do you enjoy that side of it? Maybe you still do.
So no, I mean, look, I did really enjoy it. I think for the first 10, 15 years of my career, I'm somebody who like, I still, drive around to my properties. I still shake hands with my tenants. I drive a pretty modest car and like I dress in a pretty modest way. So I don't look like the, bling bling investor when I go in to meet people. And like, I like to think that I'm pretty down to earth. And I also I like people. I like moving across different like ranges of the social spectrum. I find that like that interests me. And
likewise,
anthropologically, like going into people's apartments, be it like my, some of my extremely rich clients and then my extremely poor tenants, and just spanning that gap. Like I find it interesting. And I always found like the human dynamic of property management also kind of interesting, where you see like, okay, what's the pressure on them? How can you deal with the tenants like in a respectful way, but at the same time, try to get them to see that like, despite rent control, like there is a business logic on the other side. And so the people who own the building, be it I'm a shareholder or not are going to make certain kind of decisions, and like trying to explain that to them. But I think like in the last, I don't know, 5 years, there's an aspect of trench warfare that I've found has gotten a bit tedious. And like as this whole COVID thing happened, and there's really a lot more kind of speculator and like squeezers in the market, the tenant owner relationships have become very, very unpleasant. And now I'm tired. So like I'm actually you can't see because you only see my head. I'm actually pregnant. And
oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And when the baby comes out, I'm gonna start delegating some of my own management more extensively, because I'm kind of, and I don't think it's going to be temporary. I think it's going to be, let's find a semi-permanent solution to that, so I can keep investing. And I have two younger 25-year-old colleagues who are exactly where I was when I started. And they've got, that 10, 15 years before they get too irritated with the property management. Yeah, exactly. However long the NFL career is, right? Like what's a typical NFL career? Like 6, 7 years. I think the typical like career of a property manager is like 10, 15 years, and then you're burnt.
Yeah, I could see that. I honestly, I've barely done any property management, and I just get burnt out from talking to property managers, honestly. So more power to you guys. I mean, obviously a huge necessity. So you're going to keep the property management business and continue to work on that, right? So does that manage all of your units, but you're not going to be the actual property manager, or you're going to just completely get away from that?
No, I'm in the process of kind of like setting up a hybrid system, which I think I'm going to continue with. So like I have an office, like this is my office here, from which we do a lot of like the admin stuff. Like I'm going to continue doing, or my team is going to continue doing the bookkeeping and like the admin stuff. And then going to have partnerships with other firms that are more like boots on the ground and client facing. And like, I like that because I find that if you control the data, it allows you to remain in contact with your assets and check if things are going wrong. And also if ever you need to fire someone, like I invest in a secondary market as well. And I had to fire my manager there 6 months ago, and it was a pain, but it was a manageable pain because I had the database. He was working in my property management software. I had all the leases in electronic format because I made him save all the leases in my electronic filing system. And so like, even though he tried to screw us in the transition, like I had all the data. And so like, we were able to just phone the people and, fix things. So I'm going to continue with that hybrid model.
Interesting. Awesome. Well, this has been amazing. Appreciate all the insight. I know it's always good to get a fresh perspective, despite our economic turmoil. In terms of being an investor, and kind of the yield and the returns, a bit more appealing here in the US, albeit, battling banking collapses.
Yeah.
The right bank, as we were talking offline, a lot of our loans, commercial loans are done through the very regional banks that are in trouble. So it'll be something to keep an eye on for sure. But cool. Let's go ahead and transition here. We'll jump to the final 5. First question, best advice you've gotten from a mentor?
Oh, that's a good one. Wow. I mentioned earlier, like I'm kind of a bit self-taught, and I didn't have too many mentors. I'd have to say best thing was actually my dad, who comes from a business background and told us in life, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And I think that's true. That must have come out at the dinner table when I was 8, and I still think it's true.
That is a fact. Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes all you have to do is ask. It is a fascinating thing. A lot of people are afraid to even just ask for things. So I love that one. What is it about your career that makes you feel like you're fulfilling your why?
Oh, I think if I was only doing investing, I don't think I would be doing that. I think I wrote the book, Mindful Landlord, which we didn't talk about it much, but like, I had through martial arts, this whole like mindfulness journey where I really learned how to use my mind in a I want to say the most effective way, but in like quite an effective way, just by understanding how consciousness operates. And so, to be able to produce that shares those ideas with other real estate investors, that's very meaningful to me. And I do that now kind of through coaching as well. And I'm also now working on a second book, which is going to be specifically about some of the stuff we talked about. So, talking about tenant stories intercut with the policy decisions that Canada and Quebec has made that makes our market so unique. I don't know if you've heard of the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond.
I've not.
So he's like somebody who, I think he was looking at Missouri and the housing market and like, the issues people face with evictions, and then kind of undercutting that with like various social policy decisions that have been made in the States. And, to me, what's very interesting about Canada is that I feel like a lot of the lefties are very much proning all of these interventionist measures of how to fix the housing market. And like, we've run those experiments and like, we're 40 years into them. And I think as a benchmark of being like, guys, like this is what it looks like if this is the things that you implement, and it really makes no sense.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that, there's not some value to offering people aid. I think the fact that we have this compressed social spectrum here is a positive, but the way it's done is it creates these completely nonsensical situations. And so, the perspective that I get to have as an investor, like across the social classes, just lets you have this understanding of the spectrum of experience that, very few of, let's say, my investor friends or my social circles, people just like don't have access to that. And so for me, that's meaningful, and being able to share it, be it in a podcast or, through writing, that's really where my career fulfills my why.
I love that. That's amazing. Yeah. I've had economists on here, and it's unanimous, right? Doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on. When you talk to an economist, the rent controls they do not work. And you guys are, like you said, a very good case study for that. So this is not part of the final five, but I stole this from a very good friend of mine. What's a sacrifice you've made in your entrepreneurial career?
That's a very smart friend.
Yeah, she has a Ph.D, so she's pretty intelligent.
So for the first 10 years of my investment life, I lived in the worst part of the city, and I lived on the ground floor of a probably very low B or very high C class building, amongst the people that, I've been talking about. And, the lifestyle that I had as a result of that, I mean, my friend circle became that, because like I went to the local gym, I eat at the local restaurants, my neighbors are people from that community. Once I then started to have a family, I moved out of the area, but, making that decision to live, my friends had nice condos with indoor gyms, indoor parking, all of this stuff. They lived in nice parts of town. Bought new appliances, I still have secondhand appliances. So I think I also really deferred gratification in putting investment first. And I also realized that, financial freedom is not just a question of creating income. It's also a question of what you do with your expenses. Yes. And so, I live like modestly by choice, and that really works because the freedom that I get from it, in terms of being able to travel, in terms of having time, now, before it used to be more for competing, but now, as a mom, it means that I have time to like really be there for my kid, and also just not be stressed, right? Like it's not just being there, it's also being there and being present when I want to be, it's just priceless. So that's, to me, the sacrifices are, that really is like these kind of lifestyle sacrifices that end up, being meaningful and allowing me to be financially independent, maybe in a way that I would not have managed so early. So
I love that. So many great points there. For those who don't know, Terrie was the one who asked me that on her podcast. If you didn't get the hints there, and I told her I was going to take it. So I love that. And that is the biggest issue that I see, is people increasing their income, which is great, of course, right? But then they increase their expenses, right? So now all of a sudden, they we're driving, let's say like a Honda or an older car or something, and there's nothing wrong with Hondas, but then all of a sudden, they increase their income. So now they go and they buy an Audi, right? And all of a sudden, they just increase, almost to the dollar their expenses, so that it's really about how much you're able to keep, right? And that's the biggest key, right? Whether that's through tax incentives, decreasing your expenses, like you said, living modestly. And I think that's one of the biggest things in the US that happens is you increase your expenses. So I love that. I love hearing that. I think that's important. And like you said, that gives you that freedom, right? If your goal is to travel around like you did competing, you don't need some big house or the fancy car that's just sitting there anyway. Like that's just silly.
And that's not when, I also like, I guess is where part of the mindfulness comes in. But like, when they put me 6 feet under 40 years from now, that's not going to be what I remember. I'm not going to remember the car I drove. I'm not going to remember the granite countertops and like the bloody appliances I have. I'm going to remember those competitions I went to and the conversations I had and the friends I had and like all of those experiences. And, to me, that's where the value is. And also like, I'm going to just take the time to make this point as well, like in terms of really not getting caught up in keeping up with the Joneses. And I think it's super easy now in the social media environment and in the investment world to feel like you always have to be projecting an image of being bigger than the next person. And like, I think the more solid you are about what you really want out of things internally, the more you're able to kind of walk through that noise and be like, no, like, I don't need a fancy car. I don't need a big house. Like, I'm very happy with the lifestyle that I chose because that's what's meaningful to me, so.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And it really takes, well, I shouldn't say that, but one thing that has helped is having to make those sacrifices where, when you're kind of forced to do it, like, I'm sure you were, I am, you realize like, well, I actually don't, like, I have had the same truck for 12 years. Turns out as long as it can get me from A to B, it's totally fine. Do I want a nicer one? Yeah, eventually, of course. But, you realize like, oh, I don't need this big, huge house because, so that perspective is really nice for sure. Okay. Back to the original final five, favorite non-real estate or investment related book.
Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman, which was instrumental in getting me on the mindfulness track.
We'll have to do another episode on the mindfulness for sure. I would be very curious about that. I'm a big mindset guy, so I would love that. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Oh, making more time. I say this like once a day. I say it to my son. I'm like, if I could have one superpower, I would want there to be like, just for me, not for everybody else. Like I want there to be 40 hours in my day, but everyone else only gets 24.
People are like, Terrie, how are you so far ahead? Like, what are you doing? What's your secret? You're like, oh, good artist never reveals their secret. Sorry, guys. That's funny. Cool. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you and learn more?
Yeah. So really the book Mindful Landlord is available on Amazon. If you want to understand my thinking a little bit more, that's probably the best place to start. And if you want to reach out to me directly, my social media of choice is LinkedIn, Terrie Schauer, how it's spelled at the bottom of the screen. Find me on LinkedIn. I'll answer you.
Sweet. We will link those in the show notes. Make it super easy. Dr. Terrie, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
Thank you again for tuning in. Who do you know that wants more cash flow? Share this episode with them so you can grow your cash flow together. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you're subscribed on your platform of choice so you never miss a new episode. Go to KataniCapitalGroup.com to learn more.